Hi, I'm Neal Noethlich, and for a long time have been active in the development of Estero. It began around 2000, and with me today is Don Eslick, who has been equally and more so active in many ways in our early history. So we are going to say that this is going to cover the range of years of 2000 to 2014. But we may be a little off at the front end, and we may be a little off at the back end when it gets finally done. But we started this activity when Estero was very, very much a blank slate. And the first organization that was formed that I'm aware of was the Civic Association, which was formed by Meg Judge and quite a few others. And for a while was run by Arnie Rosenthal, who was one of our running mates. And he is deceased and passed away. But the activities that they entertained were more oriented at something for the broad picture of Estero, or a specific project, like a sidewalk out East Broadway, things of that nature. And they also would hold 6 months worth of meetings every year, and would invite to each meeting a person of interest to us, representing some organization of interest to us. And we'll start with, Don, if you don't mind, we'll start with the year 2000 in the spring, when a group of people headed up with 4 people by the name of Jim Ramsberg, Arnie Rosenthal, Larry Newell, and myself. And we formed a group that we named ECCO, ECCO, which stands for the Estero Concerned Citizens Organizations, pardon me. And we had a meeting with the county staff of land development portion in April, I believe, of 2000. And we asked for this meeting because we wanted to know whether or not it was really possible for a group of citizens to actually influence the way a community such as Estero would grow. And we were encouraged to find out that the staff and our commissioner at the time, Ray Judah, were very much in favor of this and said, yes, it can be done. We've done a little pilot program here and a little pilot program there, but we've never done anything of real substance. And so at that point in time, we got serious. And working with the chamber and other organizations where people lived, or just contributions out of your pocket, we were able to raise $8,500 to have a community plan put together. We put another $7,000 together to follow that up, and we ended up with about a total of $42,000, if I remember right, counting some money that flowed from the county later. Don, you want to pick up a little bit on where you joined and what brought you to the committee? And
thank you. I moved to Estero in 1999, in the fall of 1999, and through a golfing friend heard about this group, ECCO, that was involved in charting the future of the community. At the time that this occurred, it was evident to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people, that the growth, which is mainly coming from the south, most of the growth prior to that time had been down in Naples, and you could see it coming right up US 41, and we were in the target of that growth period. And at the point in time, as Neal indicated, US 41 in Estero was a blank slate. There were very few buildings in that area. It was mostly vacant land. And so I had been involved in community planning and in the financing of economic development and redevelopment activities. And so when this golfing friend told me about this group, I went to one of their meetings early in 2000. And it was just about the time, I think, that They'd already had the meeting with the county staff, but they're just really getting underway in terms of trying to develop what the staff called a sector plan, but in reality it was a community plan. And as Neal indicated, we're able to raise the money in order to hire professional planners to help us. I think it was Mitch Hutchcraft.
Mitch Hutchcraft of the Naysdaler did the plan.
Did the original plan, right?
The first activity we financed.
And
he $8,500.
Yeah, and in the process, they did a lot of outreach. Now, the community wasn't that big at that point in time. The 2000 census had the total population of Estero about 9,500 permanent residents. And based upon the vacancies and the information in the census, you could estimate there are another 5,500 snowbirds. So it was about 15,000 if you counted the snowbirds, 9,500. That was what we were working with. But Mitch did a good job of creating surveys that could go out and be mailed to people. We had a series of public meetings. So the development of that original plan was really an expression of what the people who were here at that point in time wanted to see the community. One last comment on that before I go back to you, Neal, is that we felt that the residential developments that were being constructed at that point in time, and there are quite a number of them, were going to be really outstanding, and that they didn't need our attention. What needed our attention was the commercial corridors, which we could see were going to be developed pretty quickly, or at least begin to get developed, because Estero is unique in that it is exactly midway between Fort Myers and Naples. And so if you're a merchant that wants to serve the whole area, it's a great location to be. Or if you already have stores in each location, it's a great way to serve the middle. So you would have your third outlet in Estero. So that our focus in that community plan really was on the commercial corridors and how they ought to be developed and how they ought to look. So there was a lot of emphasis on appearance and all that type of stuff.
Which was part of our vision, the vision statement. We have a vision statement that began the paperwork that was necessary to deal with the county, and then we had the Estero community plan, which is actually a part of the Lee plan. It's just it was called Goal 19 at that point in time, and that cemented that effort cemented the community in a way that probably no other community in Lee County at that point in time had been glued together. We had everybody pulling on the oars at the same time for a long time, and that has a lot to do with the leadership, but it also has to do with the fact that our citizens were really zeroed in on this and attended meetings, and we had a lot of meetings. We had meetings of over 300 people. So that kind of gives you an early view of how this got started, and it's been focused mainly around planning. Now, in the more recent years, the activities that the citizens and the leadership have undertaken have gone well beyond just planning for the community. And I don't know to what extent we'll get that covered today or not, but there are a lot of organizations involved. There was the Civic Association first. The Chamber of Commerce was formed then, the Estero Chamber. ECHO was formed, as we mentioned. We formed a planning panel. We used the term, the Estero Community Planning Panel, because that is what the county had decided to use in dealing with these types of requests going forward, and we were asking them for some money at that point in time to prepare and develop our first and second phases of the Land Development Code, which supports the plan.
Going back a little bit, Neal, we were called the Estero Community the Community Planning Committee.
Right.
And the composition of that, I think, is worthy of note. There were 6 of us.
Right.
And 3 of us were citizen representatives, and 3 were representatives of the development community. And so Neal and I were 2 of the citizen representatives. And then, who was that? Greg, was he? No, Greg was on the, Greg Roth
was the
the
original
developer.
David Graham.
And
a chamber representative at that time. I think it was.
went through a lot of them.
Well, I went through a lot of them, but
Yeah.
Eileen, and I think she was there first.
Eileen Galvin.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And who was the 3rd community person? There was a 3rd one.
That was
that
from
Arnie?
that was from the no, it was from the
Civic Association.
Civic Association, and it was oh my, sorry, I apologize to him. Tall guy, an elk.
Bob Morris?
No.
No. Well, anyway, the importance was that it was a balanced type of thing.
Right.
The chamber was the primary funder of that activity, but Arnie Rosenthal used to go and have his little bucket and sit in front of the Publix up there.
We raised $1,100 in one day.
Yeah, and Saturday morning he'd go up there and he'd raise money from any contribution that could be made, and he was very good at it.
He was terrific. He'd just walk right up to you and say, "Hey, you heard about this? We need some money. Just throw it in the bucket."
So and this was before the county got in the business of helping to fund these types of things.
Right.
It had to be strictly local. But we all felt that we needed to have a professional, and Mitch did an excellent job for us in that, and that wasn't a lot of money.
That's when Dan DeLisi joined the effort as a new member of the Naysdale team.
Yeah. So that group operated for probably a year and a half, right? Because at least through the adoption of the community plan by the county board in January 2002, right?
Yes.
And during that period of time, then we were having these public meetings and the surveys and refining the content of that community plan.
Correct.
Right? And so at that point in time, then, Neal, we had to have somebody that carried on the roles that were called for by the community plan, right? And that's when the ECPP was formed. Wasn't it?
We formed that
formally
when the county agreed to give us the $25,000. We formed. We had to come up with a name,
Right.
file a registration, all that.
Yeah.
So that's the name we chose because that's the name that the county had. I didn't want checks going some place that we didn't know about or whatever. I just was anticipating that we better stick to common terminology.
I remember after that was adopted, going through the community plan and identifying all of the different requirements where we were told we have to, by a certain date,
right,
develop some guidelines, which became land development code ordinances.
Most of them.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them.
Right.
And so over the period of the next 2 to 3 years, we had 3 different land development code packages that were approved by the county board.
Right. We knew early on, because of the nature of the work we did in developing the plan, where we used a professional, a very good professional. And the people that were involved were eager and experienced in many different ways, but not necessarily in what we were undertaking. So we decided that we needed a separate set of people, professionals, to do the land development code. And so we took a trip over to Boca Raton on the East Coast. Everybody knows that Boca was kind of a special place in its own. And it was arranged by a fellow named Bob Finnis, who worked over here, but used to work over there in Boca. And that group was headed up by an architect who'd worked on the Boca plan for, I think he told me 23 years or whatever. It was unbelievable. And we attended one of their, we spent 3 hours with us in the afternoon talking about planning, how the community can get involved, etc. And then we attended that evening an actual design review committee meeting. And wow, that was something that opened our eyes, because here these guys are saying, nope, you can't do that. You got to run the gutter down the scupper here, and you got to have a color chip here, and they were going, and they were authorized by the county to actually,
by the city,
or by the city to sign off on the final plan, and the developer could appeal it if he wanted to, but none of them ever did, because they knew what they were doing. And so we went to Meisner Square that night, had dinner, and walked around there, and then tell you a little story. We had a representative from the county named Jim Mudd, and he went with us. So we had Jim Ramsberg and Don and myself, and I think Arnie, and Jim Mudd, and maybe a couple other guys, Bob Finnis. Mm-hmm. And we took cameras, and we were shooting some pictures of signage and different things. And we pulled into the parking lot of a Publix, and they actually had a ballet with a porte cochere above it, right? And this young guy named Jim Mudd, he said, "Wow, I wonder what they get for. I wonder what the price of a loaf of bread is here." Just, I never got forgotten. It was kind of cute. Yeah. Then, so we became convinced that we needed the professionals, so we recruited to the best of our ability. We wanted them associated in one way or another with Estero. Either live in Estero, work in Estero, have projects in Estero, or any of the combination of above. And we were not able, we set the first group size at 7 or 8. I think it was 7, but it might have been 8. And we tried to recruit some professionals, and we got a couple of professionals out of the development community, David Graham being the most notable at that point in time, from Bonita Bay Corporation. And they were beginning to develop the Brooks, so he was involved with that. And we launched an effort with county funding, matched by our own funding, that we raised, of the funds necessary to pay the professional again. And this time it was Dan DeLisi, who was working for Mitch Cutcraft at that time. He was fresh out of
MIT.
School, MIT in Boston, in their planning and groups or school. And we took off from there, and we got the first round of development code in June, following the plan in in January. So in 6 months, we had done 2 of the first major things that we had undertaken, and moving along pretty smoothly. But we knew we were going to need a group to review projects similar to what they did in Boca. So we formed that group, entitled it the Estero Development Review Committee. Design Review Committee, excuse me. Thank you. And that group has been meeting since October of 2002. Well, Nancy, you know, you're a part of it, an integral part of it, and I think that we've grown more and more comfortable over the years with the ability of those folks. We had landscape architects, landscape business people, 2 architects, an engineer, and a business person, right? And
let me go back to
just one thing. We just expanded it from 8. We expanded it then to 9, and because it's difficult to get everybody there at the same meeting when you meet monthly. Somebody may have a commitment. So
I was just going to say that when the community plan was adopted in January 2002, one of the provisions and probably one of the most important provisions, was a requirement that before a developer could submit an application to rezone any property, that he had to hold a public meeting in the community, so that the community would learn about what this development, what the developer wanted, and conversely, the developer would learn about what the community wanted or didn't like about his proposal, his or her proposal. And that was what really triggered the need then to have the community planning panel, because you needed to have somebody who was going to set up those meetings. Now, it's conceivable that the developer could have set them up and just had a private meeting and published it, provided the necessary notice it was called for. But nobody would come, this type of thing. And so we anticipated the need for somebody to structure those meetings and to make sure that they were true reflections of the community input. And there were really public meetings in the community where the public was aware of them, etc. And so we structured the ECPP based upon the Estero Community Plan Group. We were really the core of it, and then some additional people. The county did not want us to be appointed by the members of the Board of County Commissioners, in order that we not necessarily be covered by the Sunshine Act. So that this group, by being independent but advisory to the county,
well, recommending to the county.
Advisory, yeah. I mean, we
not treating an advisory committee, but yeah.
Well, in any instance,
it functions
we gave them comments and that type of thing. In any instance, we were not subject to the Sunshine Act, but we created it as an independent body that performed this role. And only once over the years did anybody ever try to avoid going to that committee. And when that developer did that, or his representatives did it, we publicized that, and they immediately decided they wanted to come to the committee and have a real public meeting. And but the point was that the community got involved right away, and all of the people on each of these committees were volunteers. They've always been people who stepped up to the plate. Some of them professionals who are working in the community, but the citizen side has always just been volunteers, and people have spent a lot of time and effort to try to make sure that this came out. And
the fact that participation by people, citizens, in the process, not in the approvals, but in the process, is a big winner. So I would recommend that to anybody who wanted to start a plan. And there's 19 or 20 planning areas in active now in Lee County, and most of them have followed our lead in terms of what we did. And just one additional point there. Relative to who made up the committees, not the individuals, but where they would come from, we did not want to have the commissioners appointing people to the design review committee. We wanted a design review committee, and we wanted it to have some teeth, but we did not want outside people who would live or work in Estero or involved in that process. Okay, and if it was commissioner appointed, you'd get a commissioner from District 1 and District 2, and they would each have appointing power for 1 or 2 people. And so that was what we would have had to do if we wanted to settle for or reach for the type of committee that you were describing in terms of I've forgotten the word already, but that describes the, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, so the people in the planning group did not want that. So when we finally set it up and made the provisions for it, we took on the role of a recommending committee, not an advisory committee. That's the word I was looking for. Okay. Because if we did an advisory committee, that we would have to have been appointed by the commission, and that also was a brilliant piece on our. Not to brag, but it was brilliant that we kept this all among ourselves in Estero, and we called upon people from outside of Estero when we needed them, not the other way around. And it's been quite successful. We've had over 160 public meetings of the planning panel. I chaired the first 100 of those. And then the design review committee has had almost an equal number. There's fewer, let's say 140 to 150 meetings. And I don't know how many projects you've reviewed, but from a zoning standpoint, the panel has reviewed hundreds of projects, and I know that you guys have as well.
Let me just pick up, Neil, relate to what we were saying before. The requirement for community meetings was the first one for the community planning panel was the adoption of the community plan. Mm-hmm. I suspect it was the June adoption of the first land development code then that triggered the necessity to have a community planning or a design review committee or community appearance board, as they called it.
That's what we call it, yeah, right.
And so we are, even today, the only community in Southwest Florida and probably in the entire state where the developer is required to have a public meeting in the community prior to applying for a development order. Right? I just spoke it.
No, it's prior to the sufficiency. Right?
Of the yeah, okay.
For the hearing process.
But before they actually begin, or the county begins to deal with the approval. I just wanted to make it clear, Neil, that with development orders, the typical thing that happens in most communities, absent Boca and ourselves, as far as I know, staff makes that decision. Even the Board of County Commissioners doesn't know about it, or the city council doesn't know about it, that type of thing. So it is extremely rare that there is any kind of a review of development order applications, in cities and counties around Florida. And here again, it allows the community to have input on the appearance. A lot of people don't understand the difference between a rezoning and a development order, in terms of what's going on. The zoning really relates to how the site is used, that type of thing, what kind of uses you're going to have on there, etc. But in a lot of our developments, we'll have a major site in the middle and 7 or 8 outlots around the outside. Each one of those is a separate project within the development, and each one of them requires a development order. And when the zoning occurs, people don't know what's going on in an individual site or something like that, so you're not approving those individual projects within a broader development. And not to have that ability to have community input on that kind of really is a shame. A lot of these areas just don't have that ability. So it has made such a difference for us to have that kind of community input influencing the developers, particularly out-of-state developers who don't have a clue about our area. I've always marveled at the Design Review Committee, because we have some real outstanding landscape people, and we get a lot of these national developers come down here. They don't have any understanding at all about what works down here, what plants are and trees are, are working in this kind of a climate, this tropical climate, and they'll come down here with exactly the wrong stuff, and our guys have been able to redirect them, and then you get into the architectural and other parts of it. So that's really been a wonderful advantage to the beautification of the community over the years.
Okay, let me talk just for a minute, Don, about how we got from the early days and getting all the plan in place, first round of LDC in place. During that period of time, as you recall, ECHO was still functioning. I was the chair of that. You were a member of that. And it became clear because Don and I were going to meetings after meetings after meetings with developers representing the community, and it became clear to us that it was probably not necessary for both of us to attend every meeting at the same time, even though we felt like it was important when we started that, because we wanted to have at least two sets of eyes and ears in a meeting, so that we didn't have somebody come back later and say, well, you told us in such and such a meeting that it would be okay to develop this and do it this way. So I don't know how many meetings we have held over the early part of the time with the development community, specific projects and primarily. And so at that point in time, we decided we'd just merge ECHO into a new group that Don had formed when Coconut Point was, the planning for Coconut Point was underway, which was 2001, 2001 or 2, right?
2001.
Well, 2001.
Yep.
And the communities around the area all came to several sets of meetings that Don conducted and formulated a plan to how to deal with the people that were developing Coconut Point, which is the group out of Indianapolis.
No, they're at Oak Brook, Illinois.
Oak Brook started, but what's the name
Oh,
of
and
it?
then Simon.
Simon, right?
Simon Development.
So Tom Schneider and the group came down from there. So we had a lot of meetings that many of us still attended, but we began, this was a strategic point in marshaling our resources and not killing them at the same time. We needed to have some rest from time to time. So ECCL was formed, planning at Coconut Point, and then we should talk about more of the projects. And let me just throw out a couple, and then you can give your view of what was important on those. Walmart showed up, and they wanted to do a project at the northeast corner of 41 and Estero Parkway. And then after we talked with them a couple of times, all of a sudden they decided that they wanted to do a second project, which was across from Coconut Point on the west side of 41 at
northwest corner of Coconut and 41.
Coconut, right. And then we had beautiful, great architecture in the way that in what we inherited from Miramar Outlet Shops. And then they decided they wanted to do a design center, major design center for the service the West Coast. And so we got another extremely beautiful and well planned, executed and tremendously well plannings, and the landscaping and the hardscapes and all that, their parking lot, all those trees, and it sits there by itself as a real nice illustration of what a developer was willing to do and was willing to listen to us if we had any comments on. So we had kind of a combination of people who came in and had their vision pretty well aligned with our vision, and went pretty well, and we had a few that came in but didn't have much of a vision at all. Some tire stores and a couple of restaurants that tried to come and bring their nationwide plan. You got any comment on those?
Well, let me elaborate on really how ECCL came about,
Okay, yeah.
which really was a combination of two of those that you mentioned. When in 2001, when Simon Corporation and Oakbrook Properties wanted to rezone 500 acres on the east side of 41, all the way from what used to be, it's now Angelina's roughly,
Right.
Used to be Sanibel Steakhouse, all the way up to Williams Road. All of that between the railroad tracks and 41. That 500 acres was owned by Oakbrook Properties, an outfit out of Chicago or Oakbrook, Illinois. But they joint ventured with Simon Corporation, the country's largest shopping center developer. And they started in 2001. Well, this is what's referred to as a Development of Regional Impact, DRI. So here was another different kind of thing that we had to learn about. What was the process, et cetera. And the main difference with the DRI is that the Regional Planning Council gets involved, because there are regional impacts of these kind of mega developments. So in any instance, when people heard about that development coming, and the shopping center was the highlight of the whole thing, everybody around that community really wanted to be involved and had all kinds of concerns, mainly traffic related. You can imagine when you're going to put a couple million square foot of commercial in an area like that. So there were about 12 communities that we organized. All we did is an ad hoc group. We just invited the leaders of each of those communities to come and meet. We asked them to give us a list of their concerns. And collectively, we went through all of those concerns and narrowed them down to those which we felt were negotiable and reasonable, and everybody felt was germane to them. And ultimately, after we had done that, and in the process, we went and met with the Regional Planning Council, with the county, with the transportation people, all this stuff, so that we could learn enough about the process and what their requirements were, so we could be effective negotiators on this thing. And then after we had narrowed our list down and had a notion about what it is that the community wanted, we went back and met with them again to see if those kinds of things could be done legally, and if that was part of the process, and how to use the process in order to achieve those results. And so after that, only after that did we meet with the developers. They were anxious to meet, and we were holding them off until we learned enough about it to be able to operate effectively with them. And so when we met with them, we had a 5-page position paper that had all of these things down, and why we wanted them, etc. And we didn't get everything, but every one of them was addressed. They agreed to something on everything on that list, probably 10, 15 different things. Well, that success required us to stay around, because we had to monitor what they'd agreed to. Like they had a hotline for if somebody saw a truck going on a wrong road, they could call this hotline, and so then somebody had to pick up and try to enforce that with the appropriate county official.
We had a route laid out that trucks were supposed to follow, delivering earth and rock to the site.
Yep. So in any instance, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of what ultimately became the merger of the ECHO and the ECC, this ad hoc group. But what really happened was that within a year, Walmart decided they wanted to have these 2 stores in the town. And the people up at the Vines, which is immediately adjacent to the store that the first one that they talked about, they read about in the papers what we had done down at Coconut Point. So they contacted us and they wanted our help as related to that. And you and I went to the first meeting in their clubhouse were they met with Walmart, and then we worked with Bob Perry, who was one of their residents, got very involved in the process.
Yeah, he was a really good guy. He was a member of our panel too.
So that's how we went from a 12 community organization to a 15 or 16, because Breckenridge was involved. Most of the communities along Estero Parkway hadn't been built yet. And so
the north side was right. Remember when they zoned that whole piece?
Yep. Yeah, I do.
It goes all the way to the
right.
Yeah.
But the Cascades wasn't there, and none of those other communities were there at that point in time. So, but the ones that were, there's the other mobile home park up there. They were involved in that. So that was how we became a community-wide entity where all of the boards of the individual communities designated somebody to be on the ECCL, and where ECCL played the role of helping communities deal with problems outside the gates. That was the essence of it, and it was a representative network of communities. And it really came about as a result of those two real big mega development kind of things, which triggered the need on the part of the individual communities to get some help, understand the process. Once we understood the process, then we were valuable to some of these other folks that didn't know it and hadn't been impacted. So that gets us to the third of our basic big three community organizations, right? Community Planning Panel was really first, I think, then the EDRC, Design Review, and then finally ECCL.
The merger,
right? Coming on the merger, coming on the scene.
We also, during this period of time, a little bit later, when was the first time that year that we did the Village with a Vision? We did a Village with a Vision presentation. The first time we did it in 04, and we did about 15 communities, maybe 14, 15. Then the next year we did it again.
But tell them you need to get why, and it goes back to Bonita's incorporation that triggered that whole thing. Bonita Springs was incorporated as a city at the end of 1999, December 31st, 99, and their charter said that they could not annex anything in Estero for 5 years. So on December 31st, 2004, that prohibition went away. So in 2004, Gary Price, the Estero city manager, and the council,
Bonita
Springs City Council, got very aggressive about annexing the southern part of Estero, right? Because Coconut Point was now under construction. Been news for years.
I don't know how aggressive they were, but they were serious.
Well, they were serious, and they went out and held meetings in communities.
We went down and met with them, and
but they had a meeting in Lighthouse Bay that was rather notorious.
Right. I wasn't in that one, but I heard about it.
Yeah, but in any instance,
that's when they learned that Lighthouse Bay didn't want to be annexed.
But then it gets into and then I'll let you pick up again, Neil, where you started. The post office boundaries don't pay any attention to governmental boundaries. And so all of the people in the Brooks, as that community grew, were served by the Bonita post office. And that was also true where I lived in the colony and other areas.
Yeah, Fat Lakes too, I think, Marshland.
I mean, a lot of southern communities, all the way up to Williams Road, had Bonita post offices. So a lot of those people, they're all new. They just moved into the community. Those communities were all built in the first half of that decade. And so they thought they were in Bonita Springs. So with this annexation effort underway, that's when we decided we needed to educate the people that they lived in Estero. And that's where we got into the Village with a Vision, which was Jim Ramsburg's
Major contribution.
big contribution of that phrase, but he took it really from the community plan because it had a vision. And we had always followed that, right? And so
Yeah.
that's when we got into the village with a vision.
And
So
he included in it his history all the way back to, you know, the Indians when the Indians lived here and had their nation here and headquarters here. Seminoles and the other, I can't think of it. Calusa. And so Jim, with a powerful speaking voice and a real sense of timing, and an excellent deliverer of speeches. Jim
sense of humor.
And sense of humor. Jim and Don and I and Joe Pavich and just a lineup of people. Arnie Rosenthal, Meg Judge would go to a community, schedule a community, and go and spend about an hour and a half with them, with a formal presentation open to questions afterwards. And we got across to them what we were doing and what had been done in the planning part, why that was important. This whole idea of boundaries. There was an Estero fire boundary. So if you lived in the fire boundary, was that where you know, was that your home? Was that the boundary of the city? We had, as Don said, the post office back. We had the community planning area, which was part of the plan. And people were just confused, you know, understandably confused. But we tried to explain to them that there was no single boundary that defined Estero, and that the boundary we were using for planning was probably the best one to use when we were talking about it, because it had at least received some analysis when the county formed that boundary for us at the creation of the plan. Then we did it again and did about 30, I think. We roughly doubled the number of communities we went to. Then we skipped a year and did it again, or not, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So the people of Estero who are not new, but who have been here for quite a while, although they've come from other communities in the last decade, other states, the people have had the chance to understand a little bit about the boundaries and what it takes to form a city, etc. And we had a couple of groups formed that didn't really get anywhere, but kept that on the table. They were called. Last one was Vote Estero. The first one was I can't think of the name of it right now. But, people from Jim Bosch and John Rule and Mike Mallory, Larry Newell, others really wanted to incorporate, and they wanted to incorporate early on. Larry Newell wanted to do it from the day we formed ECHO, and we just thought that it was too premature, and at the same time, it was it would have been a task that I don't think that we were prepared for. It's going to be a task as it is right now. If it gets voted in, that we're probably not prepared for. But at that point in time, early on in the early part of the 2000 decade.
I just wanted to pick up on kind of finalize the thought about the use of the Village with a Vision in 2004. As a result of those meetings, educating the people about that they were in Estero, and this is what Estero means in terms of planning and community, a sense of community. Jim Ramsburg had a friend that pretty good at developing surveys. So we did a mailing to all the registered voters in Estero up to Williams Road, about 5,000 registered voters in that area. And we asked them about what did they think about Bonita annexing them. And I don't remember, but there were a number of questions in there where they got their information, a whole host of things. It was professionally done. And to our surprise and pleasure, 30% of the people responded to those. It's very number
High-
for a
high response.
mail-in survey. Some 90% said that they would participate in a referendum if one were held, and 80% of the respondents indicated they were opposed to Bonita annexing. Okay, well, as a result of that, Bonita backed off of their annexation efforts, on that type of thing, and we started a series of meetings
Correct.
with them about that same time. At our initiative, they'd had an election, and we took advantage of having a new mayor and some new council people. And because there'd been a fair amount of, I don't want to say animosity, but disagreement between the two communities, we reached out, and they agreed, and they even hired a mediator to run the early meetings. To their great credit, they spent some money to bring this guy in, and we tried to identify the way he operated. We tried to identify areas of common interest, regional concerns, and we did, and we had some success. We did that for a number of years, and then they became less fruitful, and we had some problems with the people that were the liaison from the city with us, going to the newspapers rather than discussing issues and stuff like that. And thing finally fell apart. But my point about it really was that the Village with a Vision did a good job of educating people, because when they responded to the survey, it had a real impact on this dispute between Bonita and Estero at that point in time. And that went on for another 7 or 8 years or 9 years before we more recently got into trouble again on that issue. Excuse me.
Let's see, Don, any other, we'll talk a little bit about, just for the record, the fire department.
In the park? Right?
In the park, the park, I don't know the park that good. The fire department had gone through which was a group of volunteers, had gone through a rather nasty situation between the fire department management and their employees, and so there was a lockout basically, which took place, and then a transfer of responsibilities to a private entity. I don't want to get into all of it because I don't know all of it, but it formed a kind of a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths that this was being done. Whether the fire department was right or wrong, it just wasn't being done in any kind of a nicely formal, pleasant way. And so at that point in time, Dick Schweers was contacted by the governor, and I can't remember why he chose Dick, how Dick's name got on his list, and asked him if he'd be willing to head a reversal of this and get back to a regular fire department functions. And they hired a new chief, Dennis Merrifield. And Dennis, the reason I want to bring that up is that Dennis was extremely active outside of just the fire department responsibilities. Probably got him in a little bit of trouble with his employers, but he was quite outspoken, very, very pleasant guy, and helped us quite a bit in this overall early effort. But then we talked first Barbara or Barbara Akins or Sam Levy was first. We talked Barbara into running for the board, and Sam Levy for running for the board, and they both made it. And so we began to get some, and Larry Weston was the other person. He was already on the board. So we had Dick, Larry, Akins, and Evie. 4 of them that were happy members and kind of saw things the way most of us did. And they made a major contribution in getting that going. And one of the things that they did was develop buildings that were a little more compatible with what we were trying to achieve in our vision. Not just, an old barn that you parked the truck in. These are pretty nice looking buildings, and we now have 4 of them. The first one is gone. It's, torn down. Not the first of the 4, but the very first building that they had years ago.
All of that happened in
The
the early 2000s.
The Historical Society began to get very active and did a lot of work in getting Charles Daré of the foundation that he ran interested to the point where he funded the transfer of 2 of the buildings from Highlands Avenue, which was kind of like the old center of town, which is between Corkscrew and Broadway, mostly north of the first part of that, north of the river mostly, and Charles, with his foundation, funded that, and those 2 buildings are in the park. The park gave us space, and we'll talk a little bit about what we did with the park. That was an interesting piece too. But we're talking about the Estero Community Park, and the buildings now, one of them has been completely renovated, and lots of meetings are held there, functions are held there. The second one is about halfway done. That's the schoolhouse. So we have found a way to preserve a bit of our past, because these buildings date back a long time, into the 20s or 30s probably. We were talking about the 2 buildings that had been transferred to the park, and that the county had given us land at the park. Don, why don't you talk a little bit about the process by which the community park in Estero, right off of Corkscrew Road, the process by which it was established through impact fees, etc., and the amount of input that the community actually ended up having with it.
Right.
Yeah, good victory for you.
Yeah, the county had acquired, I believe, 55 of the 65 acres using impact fee money, and a lot of which had been generated in Bonita Springs. So there was a little bit of consternation about that being spent up here in Estero, on part of a few people, I guess, down in Bonita. But in any instance, I'm guessing it was probably around 2003, something like that, that the county proceeded to begin to plan for the development of that park. And the county hired a guy named Jeff Mudgeon, architect, to help them, and he had done a lot of work for the county's Parks and Recreation Department in the past, and he's a planner as well as an architect. So they started having meetings at the library, and I counted 7 different meetings.
Right, we hosted one.
That they had where the public was involved, and we encouraged people to come and all that type of thing. And Arnie Rosenthal was right in the middle of this whole thing, because it's right across the street from where he lived in Villages Country Creek. And so that community had a particular interest, I think, in that. But in any instance, the community made it clear that they weren't looking for it to be the typical playground type of park, that the community being largely retirees, and the high school having so many play fields already just associated with that to the south and southeast, that you didn't really need a whole lot of that type of thing, and it ought to be more of an adult park that served the community needs. And we'd already established we had so many different groups that needed to have meeting rooms and things of that nature. So we wanted to make sure that recreation building be a community building as well as a recreation building.
Right.
And so it's 40-some thousand square foot in that building. It's a very large building. It's their largest park, Lee County's largest park. And
largest recreation center or largest park?
Well, both, I think. They're both the largest that they have. So the community had a lot of input, and the park really was designed for the community in mind. The Parks and Recreation entered into a contract with the school board for the joint use of their play fields and this type of thing, so they covered that whole thing in that process. We needed to be cognizant, and they were cognizant of the needs of the San Carlos Park community as well. There are a lot more children in that community than there are in ours, and they have some parks up there, particularly a large park up on Three Oaks Parkway. But it didn't have soccer fields and some of the other things that community needed. And they didn't have the same kind of a community recreation building for a lot of the things. So they wanted to make sure that the children up there were able to use this facility, etc. And so there was a goodly amount of give and take involved in that thing. Finally, the thing that was most interesting is Arnie probably more responsible than anybody for the name of the park, Estero Community Park. There was a contingent in Bonita that wanted to be called the Bonita Community Park because the land had largely been financed by some of the impact fees that had been developed down there. And Arnie held out and fought like tooth and nail to have it named Estero Community Park, the rationale being that's where it is. And if you want people to be able to find it, its name needs to have the location. And ultimately he prevailed in that, and I think that's been a wonderful success for the community.
Oh, the park is, and the rec center is used constantly.
Yeah.
It's loaded with
yeah. So it's been a great
on the rear of that building, we convinced the county that we needed a band shell type thing, or whatever you want to call the curve back, so that we can have concerts out there and some slope. We got people for concerts and other shows, etc., who use it not as much as we had hoped. Our cultural activity has been a little bit more limited than we had hoped originally.
We did, again, this goes a little bit to ECCL's role. ECCL was very much involved in getting people involved in that participation. But in addition to that, then after that was constructed, we reached out to one of the symphonies here in Southwest Florida and got them to come down and hold some concerts.
In the first year, they did 4, I think.
A series of concerts and that type of thing. Unfortunately, they weren't well attended. And also we worked with the arts. We had an arts group that we encouraged, and had a big event over at the Hyatt one year, and we got about 300 people. We were trying to recruit people for all the arts groups in the community, and there were a lot of them from different specialties. And we helped to recruit memberships for them. And at that point in time, there were 2 different developments that were interested in having theaters of one type or another on their property. Estero on the River, which is on the northeast corner of Corkscrew and 41, the developer of that property offered to give the Gulf Shore Playhouse the land for a theater in there. Just grant them a couple, 2-3 acres. Would have been a theater right on the river. And then Jim Wallace, the developer of Apollo, for a while had an option on what they call it, the Rapallo Arts District, or
Yes.
the property just
Art
north of
district in
Rapallo.
Rapallo, I believe, or something.
Yeah, Art District Rapallo, which is now the Hertz property. And he had a wonderful plan for a theater, a different kind of theater that would be available for all people to use it, whether it be for concerts or having acoustically, both of them are going to be acoustically appropriate. And so that was going to be a different one. The other was going to be a repertory theater. And this was going to be one where you could have concerts or lectures or whatever have you. So they were not competing, they complemented one another. But unfortunately, the economy went south and neither of them was actually done. But the ECCL encouraged both of them and tried to work with them to help them to find the resources necessary in order to be able to fulfill their vision.
We have another area that I think we ought to address, and that is rock mining. I think the first rock mine that sits on, we haven't done this before, yeah. It sits on the land next to Bellaterra, which is now, and it's formed a big lake, the rock mine has formed a big lake, and they're entitling the development that's going to go on there Coconut Shores.
Corkscrew Shores.
Corkscrew Shores, yeah, that makes sense, right.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think we ought to talk about it is because it also touches on, we have a second mine on Corkscrew out 11 miles roughly from 75. And this whole area touches on the DRGR, which feeds water to us and to others to the south of us, preserves things, preserves water, preserves habitat, etc. And you were an instrumental man in the committee of that, which goes beyond what we're doing just in Estero. But you want to put a few words in there on that?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that because we triggered that whole thing.
Yeah,
in about 2004,
right?
Nancy Payton, who is has long been the representative of the Florida Wildlife Federation in this region, introduced me to a person who was involved with the E.O. Dunn, Elizabeth O. Dunn Foundation, an environmentally oriented foundation on the East Coast. As a result of that introduction, we were able to get $25,000–$30,000 from them, which we used to hire Bill Spikowski, who's formerly the planning director for Lee County and is a Fort Myers-based professional planner of some repute. And we hired Bill to develop a report on all of the prior reports that had been done on the DRGR, the Density Reduction Groundwater Resource Area, just east of Estero and Bonita Springs. Very, very large area. I've forgotten how many acres there are out there, but it was
75,000 or so originally. I don't know how much of that's been chewed up.
Yeah, but about a fifth or a sixth of the entire county is in this DRGR zoned area. And that area was rezoned in 1989 and called the Density Reduction Groundwater Resource Area for a very good reason. One is that Lee County has two pre-platted communities, Lehigh Acres and Cape Coral, which together have 300,000 to 400,000 housing units, plots.
Right.
Enormous, and they've only begun to get developed. About probably 20% developed today, maybe 25%. So the state was very concerned that we were going to be overdeveloped and overpopulated and not have adequate water This is where our water comes from. It was all wetlands out there. And they felt that the county ought to limit the development in that area, 1 per 10 acres, 1 unit per 10 acres, or 1 unit per 20 acres if it's wetlands, which would very much restrict the development of that area and leave it to be a groundwater resource area. So that was set up in 1989, 1990. One of the things that could be done out there was mining. And there was, always had been, a lot of mining up in the northern part of it by Alico Road. There was very, very intensive rock mine area. And rock mine is, what do you call it? I've forgotten the name of the rock itself.
Oh,
but it becomes aggregate.
Yeah.
I guess it's just called rock mining.
Yeah, it's called rock mining, but it's a special rock.
Yeah, it's a special rock that
very porous and
that is crushed up, right. And it becomes useful in all kinds of construction. It's used for road construction,
highway grade,
the base of all roads, streets. It's converted into cement and cement block.
Blacktop.
In any instance, that area out there had provided 80% of all the lime rock, all the aggregate needed for development for the last 20 to 30 years in the 7 counties from Sarasota to Collier. So we were the second largest rock mining area in the state, next to the Miami-Dade area. And so this had been going on in the DRGR, and now there was a lawsuit that was filed over on Miami-Dade, which raised some issues about whether or not that was polluting the water over there.
Arsenic.
And so all of a sudden there was a great deal of interest on the part of the mining companies and the landowners out here to expand the mining area in the DRGR. There's a lot of rock in other areas out there along Corkscrew Road, as is demonstrated by the 2 mines that you were talking about, Neil. So any instance, going back to our role in it, Bill's report, which was completed, I think, probably the end of 2004, triggered the county to redo the comprehensive plan for the DRGR. And over the next 2 or 3 years, they spent $1,600,000 in hiring all kinds of different consultants, water consultants, ecologists, planners, whatever have you, to replan that whole area out there. And it wouldn't have happened but for the ECCL getting Spakowski to do this study, and it really kind of, in a sense, embarrassed them into action.
That was totally at our initiative.
Right?
Absolutely.
And here we are, the downstream community, where if you don't have that water cleaned up by the wetlands, Estero Bay gets more and more polluted, right? And the water supply, 80% of Lee County's total water supply, their potable water, comes from about 250 wells out there in the DRGR. So as we grow from our present 650,000 to 1.3 million, which is forecast for the county, where's the water going to come from? You know, if you don't preserve that area and its ability to re-nourish the aquifers that are down below. So it was quite an achievement for the community. We had a lot of help from the Conservancy and from all of the other environmental groups. But we were really trying to protect our interests because we're downstream, and if there were a lot of attempts to develop some of that land, which would have enhanced our chances for flooding in addition to polluting the Estero Bay. So,
well, that's good. I think if we want to wrap this up a little bit, I think where we are now is that the ECCL's efforts are significantly directed towards this whole formation of a city. What do we call that? Incorporation into cityhood. And we're going to know by the end of the year, or by November 4th, I guess. By the 5th, we'll know where we are on that. And from a planning organization standpoint, we're trying to get we have done a redo of the community plan, and that has been voted on to be transmitted to Tallahassee, and then it'll come back to the county commission. So there's a good chance we'll have that in place. But we need to do a major overhaul of the Estero design, Land Development Code, the LDC. And we're probably not going to get that done before the incorporation takes place. And for some that may mean that it's going to be difficult, because now we're going to have to uphold everything we do in a appointed committee by the new city council, and all the sunshine rules and regulations, etc. that will apply. So we've still got the two major committees working, and the historical committee is working very, very hard. We have an active library association that has done major work in raising money for the library. Who else do we have? I think that's.
Well, you're looking at thinking. Let me just kind of, if I could, put everything in perspective, and as I view it anyway. In 2000, when we first started this whole thing, we had about 7,000 houses. I just was saying that since 2000, back in 2000, we had about 7,000 housing units, and only about 500,000 square foot of commercial that was in place at that point in time. And over the course of the decade, we've had probably somewhere between 15,000 and 16,000 housing units that were built. We're about probably 80% built out, just in terms of what can be built on the remaining vacant parcels of property there. On the commercial side, we added about 4 million square foot over the decades. We went from 500,000 to about 4.5 million. Our challenge is looking ahead from a planning perspective and this type of thing, is that we are mainly in the commercial area. We have yet another 1,000 acres of vacant commercial property, mainly along Corkscrew Road and then up and down 41, but also at some of the other major intersections, like
is it zoned but not built, or
zoned but not built, and that type of thing. So you've got, and it's really our challenge in the future is really infill development for the most part. We'll have, like I say, we have over 20,000 housing units, probably another 5,000, maybe 7,000, 8,000 more to come, not a whole lot. 4.5 million square foot of commercial, but a lot of opportunity in these remaining 1,000 acres for a combination of housing and commercial. Probably a lot less retail. Our studies that we've had done for us indicate that we import a lot of our buyers because we have two major regional centers, Coconut Point and Miramar. 60% of all of their shoppers don't live in Estero. So our big retailers for everybody else, and our future retail development probably is just going to be infill as our population grows, et cetera. It's largely just going to handle that kind of stuff, or people that are visiting the area or what have you. So I think our challenge is to try to make sure that the remaining 1,000 acres of land, which is along our commercial corridors, gets developed as nicely as what we've seen heretofore. And so with the new village council and the government light that they're going to have, I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to make recommendations and do volunteer work in the future to help them to try to figure out how best to proceed. And the other thing that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is the hospital and our need for health care down here. Estero and Bonita, which is really an underserved market in this area, has 37% of our populations over 65. Florida has 18%, and nationwide it's 12%. So our communities triple the nationwide average for people over 65, double even the Florida rate at 18. And everybody knows that it's that 65 and up age bracket that really demands hospital care and extensive health care. And so hopefully the effort that is underway with Lee Memorial will generate a new kind of healthcare delivery system for this intensive elderly population that we have here in our area. I'm hopeful that it'll work out. They have just hired some expensive consultants to help them to figure that out, and they've included us in the process because they know that we have been committed to that for a long, long period of time and can help them to get some things done as they move ahead.
You know, when I think back on the whole process that we've been through, a couple of things stand out. One of which is I don't believe any of us, and certainly county staff and the commissioners did not believe that we would be around 14 years after the first time we met with them. And that was a chief concern on there, right? And we wouldn't have any way of anticipating it, but it shows the remarkable staying power of people who are interested in something. And the second piece of that is the amount of input that we've been able to provide to the development community and the reception that it has received to some extent based on the influence that we have developed over the years. But in many cases, just they want to do things right also. Right? They see that this is a pretty good looking place, and it doesn't, as Jim always says, it doesn't take that much more to make it really special. So why don't you just go ahead and do it?
Yeah. The other thing that is important in that respect is it points out the uniqueness of the community, Neal, in terms of that staying power, because we are a community that is blessed by having so many retired professionals and executives and people like that who have had meaningful careers. And even if they just come in for a year and don't stay with that particular thing, they still have so much to contribute. Right. So like when we had our airplane noise committee, we ended up with a lot of talent that came from that industry, right? Yeah, right? Professional pilots, commercial pilots, people who ran airports before, people who were air controllers, and then we go to our healthcare thing. We had 50 people that were retired from the healthcare industry that wanted to help, whether they were administrators or doctors or nurses or whatever have you. So we're just very fortunate, a very unique community by having so many people that are so talented and willing, because of their retirement status, to make a contribution. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about another creation of the ECCL, and that is the ECIF, the Estero Community Improvement Foundation. ECCL is organized as a 501c4 for tax purposes, because we do lobby, quote unquote. We've gone to the county and advocated for the community endlessly. We've gone to the water management district and tried to get them to do things that would be beneficial to the community, and so all that kind of stuff. So going back, where we needed to raise money from people who were not, were subject to federal income taxes, we needed a 501c3. And so we created the Estero Community Improvement Fund probably in about 04, 05, something like that.
For a specific project, right?
Well, originally it was to accept the grant that we got for Spakowski.
Yeah, and we also did the landscaping at the high school.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
You want me to?
Yeah,
All right, well, in any instance, we want to give a lot of credit to Dan Dronkers.
Right.
Dan Dronkers is a retired banker, lives in Marsh Landing. And Dan, we collectively, we thought that the chain link fence around the high school, Estero High School, on Williams Road and River Ranch, really diminished the beauty of the building. The building is very, very attractive. And you had this chain link fence all the way around it. It was a big, long expanse. And so we took on as a community project the landscaping outside of that fence and on that fence in order to make the high school look a lot better and consistent with a lot of the other goals and objectives that we had accomplished on a lot of private properties, right? And the school board didn't have any money, so we decided we'd go out and try to raise that, and through small contributions, etc. And Dan Dronkers really kind of led the charge on that. I don't remember how much we raised, probably $30,000, $40,000. And Al O'Donnell,
Yes.
O'Donnell Landscaping, probably gave us everything it cost, or less, there. So it really, today, now it's been there 5 or 10 years, really looks so much more than we ever thought it possibly could have been. And so all the way, from the creeping vines on the fence to all of the different trees and bushes that are out there, it really has greatly improved that. But that was those two kinds of things were what the ECIF has contributed over the years. Projects which it ran, and then grants that was able to achieve. And Claire Hallenstein, who is a professional grant writer, helped on a series of different grants that we received, that ECIF received. She now serves on the board of the ECIF. And the ECIF is now getting cranked up to probably play an even more significant role once we become a city in helping to fund those kind of things that the city will not be able to do directly, healthcare being one of them, but arts and all of that kind of stuff. There are a whole variety of things that where you've got a community need, but it's not something the municipality is going to address, particularly in the early days where they're really going to have to just get up and running and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah. We covered a lot of ground, right?
Yeah. So let's just say at the end that there's a vote in November whether or not we become incorporated.
Right.
And if so, by December 31st, we begin operation as a village of Estero,
Right.
right?
Right.
And we have a transition committee that's working on.
In order to make sure we get this year's funds, right?
Right. That's the.
You can wait for the last minute to get this year's funds.
Yeah. Well, we met with the.
Because we'll need something, we have to have something.
Well, what they do is they sell tax anticipation notes.
Oh, they do?
Yeah,
Oh.
and they sell them to the local, there's local banks, 'cause it's all secured by your future tax revenue. And as long as you have decent estimates of what those tax revenues are, then you can sell them. And so we have this transition committee that's now working on that kind of stuff. And Bob Lenish is going to be the head of that financial part of it. And we'll no doubt have to have a delegation go up to Tallahassee and learn more about how that works, and then also meeting with the county in terms of the transition contracts with them to do services, but also, you know, when and how we'll start to get property tax revenues. So,
Okay.
a lot of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Nancy.